Thank you, Federica and Nicola, for the invitation. I'm Fernando. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. So what I'm going to bring here is the discussion about an area that sometimes doesn't get really discussed, which is aquaculture. And so for this reason, I copied Vittorio's picture about this thing, that this is the ideal world that we imagine about animals in the ocean, but however, there are plenty of pathogens everywhere, and even I will say that the aquatic medium is more complicated to manage than terrestrial at some point, because you can establish some barriers and to avoid some spread of pathogens sometimes. And if you see, you count the number of viruses, for example, in the aquatic ecosystem or the ocean, it is estimated that 4 times 10 to 30 viruses exist in the ocean. So imagine how to handle that idea. And I'm bringing this because aquaculture is likely the sector, the blue line here is the food system, is growing over the last year heavily, and is expanding in different continents and in different countries, of course, because the consumption also is increasing too. So it's a demand of the new society asking for seafood, and typically seafood has been extracted from the fisheries sector, but as you can see here in this line, fishery has been even decreasing because the aquaculture have been using or replacing all this sector. So it has some benefit in terms of not using or extracting resources from the fisheries, and now using aquaculture as a way to provide food supply. But there are many complications, and it's related because of the diversity. Again, compared to terrestrial animals, aquaculture has at least 580 different species. In terrestrial production, we have just few: cattle, poultry, swine, to say about 10 at most, right? But here you have a different variety of species, from fin fish, mollusk, crustacean. That means that also the spatial setting is very different, sometimes using fresh water or marine water or estuary water, but it's really complicated the way that you go from a very natural system like ponds that you see sometimes for shrimp or for tilapia, or very highly intensive system, which are the ideal, for example, new technologies about recirculation aquaculture system, which is basically a farm that uses water, that recirculate the water, so it doesn't have any interaction or less interaction with the environment or water from the environment. But those are very highly technified and expensive. So for now, mostly are natural and semi-intensive. If you go to Africa or South America or even in Asia, where concentrate most of the aquaculture. Now, if you look back on time, what happened with the emergence of infectious diseases, and we have been discussing this, but there are 4 main drivers. One is the trade and live animal and product movement. The global trade for aquatic product is huge, probably one of the largest in the world, and you move fish and subproducts from many places around the world. The aquatic ecosystem, including climate change, as I mentioned, the ocean is a very different environment compared to the air or compared to the land, so it's really adds some complication. The farming structure and management control, I'll show you later that farming is very intense, very clustered, so you have different farms sharing the same environment and in a very clustered aquatic space. And the other thing is the lack of knowledge of pathogen and the host. So Paolo was showing an example of the terrestrial animal code from the Animal Health Organization. That happened, the code, 35 years before the aquatic health code. And that in some way represents how behind the knowledge on aquatic species compared to terrestrial. So the knowledge for foot and mouth disease, avian flu, classical swine fever is huge compared to the new diseases that we are reporting or have been reported in aquaculture. And something that Vittorio also mentioned about the social component. No matter if you know very well each of those 4, the social component is very important, the governance, the economic and cultural. You can provide all the ingredients for controlling or preventing disease, But if you don't have in place governance or legislation that focus on aquaculture, nothing's going to happen or going to change. As I said, disease control is increasingly complex in aquaculture, so you have different ways that you can transfer diseases for wild aquatic animal, the water itself, processing plants that are located so they can, share some water from the processing plant to the new populations, mechanical transmission and movement of aquatic animal and aquaculture purposes. So in order to think about zoning on compartmentalization, you really need to understand the component of each of those and know particularly the characteristic of the pathogens, the environment, and all together to make a good plan for zoning or compartmentalization. So I'm bringing this because this is part of the focus of the conversation. And as I said, the Aquatic Animal Health Code has a chapter, the number 4, and the section 4.2 is just 2 pages, very short one, and is really showing the main guidelines about concept for zoning and compartmentalization. The main difference is that zoning is based pretty much on geographical boundaries for aquatic animal health, and compartmentalization is more biosecurity-based definition. Okay, so you use depending on where do you want to use this strategy. The goal is establish subpopulation with distinct health statuses to support disease control and trade. And here, subpopulation, that means that you need to know your population. And hardly we know the populations in aquaculture, not for salmon farming because it's more technified, but for tilapia or shrimp it's really complicated. So an example for here, we have a disease-free coastal zone used for regional eradication. It's controlled by the competent authority and is based on geography. And for the other side, compartmentalization can be a high health shrimp hatchery, vertical integration or disease-free unit, which they use, is controlled by the facility management and based on biosecurity and management. So those are 2 different approaches, and there are some examples. Again, we need to assume knowledge on the population, document epidemiological separation, that means having a good understanding on the risk for each of those components, robust surveillance and traceability, and certification by competent authority, and transparent and auditable processes. Those are the minimum requirements that, as Paolo mentioned, need to be used for, in the case for animal production. Our examples, successful examples, yes, lucky this company, we are doing some advertisement for free, but Benchmark Genetics is a company that uses broodstock to generate eggs, salmon eggs, and they made this disease-free compartment in Chile. It's one of the few examples where successfully have them able to demonstrate through the authority and recognized by the World Animal Health Organization that they are a biosecure compartment, and they are able now to export from Chile to different places to securing the business and the disease prevention. For open system, typically it's not suitable. It's really hard to make that, Vittorio is moving his head. Semi-open, semi-closed, suitable with control, but closed system is really, really the idea. At least it will be too much fantasious to think about implementation of disease survey, compartment or in the aquaculture at this point. The epidemiological separation, it's basically also some sort of HACCP, right? The HACCP comes from food safety, but it's more or less the same. You need to look for each of those components, critical point for disease transmission, and set up this system for including, of course, surveillance within and outside the compartment with enhanced diagnostic capacity. Another aspect in aquaculture, we just are using quantitative PCR for some of the pathogens, implementing new techniques for detection, so it's something really, really rudimentary at some point. Examples. So this is Chile, Norway, and Scotland, where I'm working now. I used to work here, and I have very good collaboration with each of those. Each of those points are salmon farms, and this is how it looks like a salmon farming industry. This is the number 1 in the world, number 2, and number 3, okay? And what they have planned, and this is based on epidemics in the past, important epidemics that they learned, that it doesn't matter if I have my own farm and doesn't work with you or with you in the same area, because it's going to be very detrimental. So we need to establish some zoning, and in this case, it's based on and the establishment of management areas. So this is all about what you have been discussing here, so I'm not going to go into much details about this, but it is super important, this conversation, because the way that aquaculture can really move into a more sustainable is applying these tools for zoning and management of the disease. And of course, rely heavily on National Veterinary Information System. This is an example from a very simple one from Sandy Murray, a colleague in Scotland, and they use the tidal amplitude and the tidal period in this very basic formula to create a simple circle around one farm. This is supposed to be the extension of the potential spread of pathogen. Another thing that happened, and I remember that when I was working with the epidemic of infectious salmon anemia and orthomyxovirus in Chile in 2007 to 2009, sometimes the OIE guidelines, or World Animal Health Organization guidelines, provide, for example, buffering zones, for example, from the terrestrial animal. But if you establish 5 kilometers buffer zone for controlling disease, it doesn't make any sense here, because it's probably 20 or 30 kilometers around where you share the environment. So those are things that we realize. So in this case, the 3 countries, they have established different management or zoning for disease management. Some of them are successful, some of them have not. But the idea is to doing zoning. What does it mean? That you have the same period for stocking fish, the same period for harvesting fish. You cannot stock in one place at the same time that the stocking in the other area. It's one or the other. So you create a separation on the potential spread. I've been working with evaluation of that. Particularly, this approach is very good. It's endemic epidemic modeling, where you evaluate the disease in each of these management areas. So you change your epidemiological unit from the farm, a point, to an area. And this approach is basically telling you what is the, if you can divide the infectious process in 3 components, the endemic, the autoregressive, it means that the one that you generate on your own area, or the influence for the other, so you can divide on 3 components the infectious process, how much will be explained, but what happened in the zone. And in this case, for PC Rickettsia salmonis, a disease in Chile, 70% of the whole process might be explained for the management on the zone, okay? So those kind of exercise, when you have data that can give you on time this sort of information. Another one that we are exploring in stream spatial network analysis. That means that it's similar to network analysis, spatial network analysis, but you capture the features of the stream network, like rivers or stream, where you have different, slope, characteristic of the water, so you can actually model how it looks like this eventually if you want to do some zoning based on the characteristic of the hydrology, which are even more advanced information right now. Another final example is the Finland. For example, in Finland, they have demonstrated VHS, which is viral hemorrhagic septicemia, free compartment, and they cannot, and they have also the compartment for in the marine areas. And the movement has to be from low health to high health status compartment. The same situation in BKD, bacterial kidney disease, which is the tuberculosis for salmon in Scotland. But it's all about making this zoning, again, for controlling disease. So, complementary tools really needed for aquaculture, really need more people engaged in aquaculture. This is a call also for all of you who wants to see the future in a different area, moving from the terrestrial to the aquatic environment. It requires science, infrastructure, and cooperation. it's very useful, especially now that we were talking that in low and middle income countries, you don't even know where the farms are. You just suspect where they are, in some lake, in some river, but the lack of resources cannot make a system like the salmon one, which is in the high income countries. They have everything very good geo-reference, but not the same in low and middle income countries. So this kind of zoning will be a very good approximation for that. And geospatial data and real-time system will enhance precision and response. With that, I hope I did in good time, and thank you again.
Thank you.
I'm thinking to Italy. These cages in the sea. Yeah. We have a lot of problem, for example, for birds because of pollution by feces and they go to the fisheries, especially in the mussel. Is there any attempt to study the role of tide and sea current, come si dice?
Stream.
Le maree, le correnti.
Tide e le correnti stream.
Tide is the movement, but correnti, come si dice in inglese? Corrente. Flow. Corrente, la corrente del mare. As a dilution effect.
So Vittorio, that's something that is more sophisticated, but is possible. So one way that salmon farming is the very top because it's very expensive and very sensitive fish species. So they invest a lot of money for the salmon farming. And what they use are hydrodynamic oceanographic models. So they explore the connectivity based on temperature, salinity, pH, and currents, tide, and they have planned all these bay management areas in the salmon farm are based on those studies. Yeah, so it is possible. I don't know how is the Mediterranean in terms of that kind of study, but I will say that probably you will have the same thing. It's just nobody maybe has been putting that in the discussion.
Thank you.
Questions? No question. I have a question. The aquatic code, no? You say that chapter 4, there is a special session for compartmentalization and zoning. But if we compare the terrestrial code with the aquatic one, just only look at the number of pages dedicated in the terrestrial respect to the aquatic, it seems that it's very few. Any reasons for your perspective, even if you are not part of the Code Commission?
No, but I was with Alicia Gallardo, who is the president of the Commission, this Monday in Edinburgh together, discussing this before. Okay. So they will have actually the session next week, right? They will have the session, the aquatic session, and they will bring the topic of compartmentalization and zoning in the discussion. So it would be good if you can maybe take a look there and visit them there in Rome. So yes, it's something that, but it is expected because at the same time, you know, for the terrestrial, in livestock, there are trade and there is an important business behind that move into that. So in some way, the response from the international authority is to address those questions about trading and protecting in the different countries. And this is not the case for the aquaculture. Aquaculture is really new in terms of thinking about zoning on compartmentalization for trade restriction. There is not really trade restriction related with aquaculture, so it's only maybe for salmon, but for the other thing it's really rudimentary to say at the starting. But I think is one of the reasons for the OIE have been the business or the countries have been pushing into that regulation, which is not the case for aquaculture. So it comes response, proactive, reactive. Yeah.
Yeah. Moreover, in your presentation, you mixed the term zoning with the area, no? More oriented in management area in case of outbreaks or in case of surveillance or in case of restocking. I saw the concept of aquaculture management area in the FAO manual. There's no concept on that in the OA manual. So it's, there is two different perspectives, clearly. FAO has another let's say, orientation or as another orientation. But for your point of view, it's how many times you implement zoning in case of an outbreak or in case of a free zone, respect with the concept related to management area. That is no legal implication because it's not mentioned in the standard.
Well, back to the first is the implementation on the farm level. That's something that I'm trying to recall, even in the salmon farming, it's not that has been implemented. Salmon are freshwater and saltwater. So you have two different stages. Those are anadromous species, so they need to live in the freshwater and then have a process of smoltification, which is the adaptation from fresh to saltwater. So you have two different production. And even in that, I haven't seen any, strict compartmentalization properly at the company level. Now, in terms of the controlling, all this management has been reactive of past epidemics. The Norwegian, the Scottish, and the Chilean, they all suffer these infectious salmon anemia epidemics, and then after that, they make this management area. But for recent tilapia lake virus, streptococcus in tilapia as well, you don't see that. No one is very wild, the way that you manage it.
There's no sensibility on that.
No.
Compartmentalization, do you have a standardized checklist to establish that this is a well-recognized compartment, or is just an idea?
Well, the example that I show about this freshwater company is the only one that I am aware about this recognition of the compartmentalization properly done. Yeah, no, I don't have enough experience to tell you how it looks like, but it's just something new.
The question is because in the avian influenza, there is a sort of checklist that can be used to evaluate the compartment.
Okay,
and
sure.
To have room to be recognized.
Probably the aquaculture world will receive all the advices and mistakes from the terrestrial to the aquaculture, so it's going to happen the same.
So there are room to improve.
Yeah.
To improve.
Yeah.
Fantastic.